Thank you. It's an absolute privilege for me to have the opportunity to talk about federalism in India. Has India lost its spirit of federalism? With four illustrious speakers who've been an active participant in shaping the nature of India's federal bargain and fighting for the spirit of federalism for India. My job as moderator is to throw out sets of provocations in the hope that all of you will respond to really enrich this debate. So let me start by asking all of you to reflect on what federalism is, because in order for us to understand and try and answer whether India's lost its spirit of federalism, we first, I think, have to understand what the spirit of federalism for India was to be able to identify what we've lost. Scholars of federalism, of Indian federalism, have gone back to our constitutional debates and argued that India had a fairly unique kind of federalism, different to core federalism that the United States, for example, has. Because it was a federalism, and if you look through our constitutional debates, B.R. Ambedkar in particular played an important role in arguing for a much more centralized notion of federalism. So in a sense, in 1950, when we adopted our constitution, we were looking to what many scholars have described as a quasi-federal structure, or a federalism with very strong centripetal tendencies, which is why the center plays an enormously critical role in India's federalism, unique compared to anywhere else in the world. So let's start with that. Were we, in 1950, committing ourselves to a genuinely federal India? And if so, what was the nature of that federalism that we may or may not have lost today? Shashi, may I start with you?
Sure, Yamini. We're very happy to defer to our home state here. Though I suspect on this, most of us are on the same page. As far as 1950 is concerned, no, I think quasi-federal is absolutely the right answer, because what they felt was that you needed, on the one hand, to keep the country together. Don't forget, we just emerged from a terrible, violent partition. There were still the princely states that had very recently been brought into the Union. So there was very much this somewhat centralizing tendency reflected in the preoccupations of people like Nehru and Ambedkar, who wanted to keep the country united. Sardar Patel, for example, retaining the civil services as the steel frame of the unitary system. But at the same time, there is a curious ambivalence, because there's language like India being a union of states. Because after all, in the US, it literally was a union of states. The states pre-existed and came together to create the union. But in our case, the union came first, and the union still has the constitutional right to create states, as we've seen with the creations of some of the more recent states in the last 25 years. So you've got a very interesting ambivalence, but that ambivalence need not be problematic if there is a fair balance. The overall objective ought to be that everybody, wherever they are in India, should feel they have an equal stake in the survival and success of our country. And federalism is a means of ensuring that. The problem has been that the attempts that were made to maintain that have sadly declined or been diluted over the years. We have seen, for example, a situation where the proportion of resources that the center transfers to the states has significantly declined. Central revenues have gone up. I think PTR and KTR can speak to this more than the other, Mr. Reddy, the finance ministers can speak to this better. But this has become a genuine challenge, and therefore the capacity, the ability of the states to balance the overweening authority of the center has been called into question like never before in the last decade or so. That, I think, is where the question of the spirit of federalism comes up. There was a balance. Has that balance been lost?
Thank you. So there was a balance, and in that balance, the center certainly played a crucial role, particularly, as you say, in the ability to form states. KTR, may I come to you first to ask you to reflect on precisely this? Before we get into what we are losing, to understand what was the nature of that balance, because the center played a very crucial role in actually creating, or continues, in fact, by virtue of its constitutional powers, in shaping the nature of the formation of states. So, you know, in your imagination of what federalism is as articulated in the Constitution, what is the role of the center in that framing?
Thank you, Yamini. Firstly, thanks to Vasu and team of South First for having us here. I think it's an honor to, be on this panel. I've had the good fortune of meeting Thiaga for the first time. Good seeing you. Going to the question that you asked, I think the reference that you made with respect to Constituent Assembly debates, I think Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, just to quote him, because I don't want to get it wrong, he had very famously said, these provisions with respect to defining India as a union of the states make the Indian constitution both unitary as well as federal, according to the requirements of time and circumstances. In normal times, it is framed to work as a federal system, but in times of war, some sort of an emergency or an exigency, it is so designed as to make it work as though it was a unitary system. So the fact is, India, without a question, as enshrined in the Constitution, is a federal republic. But the efforts that are being made over the last few decades, I'll not name names, but I'd definitely say both the union governments, whoever it was, have made consistent efforts to centralize power, have made deliberate attempts to ensure that union of states eventually sort of becomes a unitary state. And that is reflected in so many things. In fact, a classic example, as we sit here and speak on the 17th of September 2022, we've had an invasion of sorts in Hyderabad today. In fact, 17th of September 1948 is the day when Hyderabad became part of Indian Union. We integrated into Indian Union. This was exactly 74 years ago. Now, there are different interpretations, different versions. Some people would like to call it liberation, somebody else calls it integration. But the fact is, Hyderabad, the princely state of Hyderabad, became part of Indian Union. Now, if you wanted to celebrate an occasion like this, if you wanted to commemorate an occasion like this, what should the union government do? You should talk to the state government, you should discuss with us, should seek our opinion, because after all, we are a democracy. Irrespective of our political ideologies, affiliations, we need to talk to each other, we need to consult with each other, and this is not a political party one-upmanship. This is not a BJP versus TRS. This is the union government versus the state government. So when the state government had its difference of opinion, today, in fact, like I said, we had an invasion of sorts. We have the union home minister here, along with two other chief ministers and a couple of other cabinet ministers, who are doing a parallel program to what the state government has envisioned and what the state government has planned. Now, this kind of conflicting message that is being given out by way of competing, claims on the same occasion is what is wrong with the federal structure of India today. Just to give you an example, I can quote a number of other things that are wrong, but since this happened this morning, so that's why, in fact, I feel there was a time right after independence where we had a union home minister who would actually flew down to Hyderabad to unite and integrate Hyderabad into Indian Union. Today we have a home minister after 74 years who flew down, who's trying to divide us and bully us, literally bully us into submission of sorts, wanting to subscribe to their ideology, wanting to just adhere to whatever they say, wanting to literally dictate terms to us, which is not acceptable. After all, we are the world's largest democracy, and this sort of, I am superior to you and you are subservient to me kind of an attitude is not something that I think was enshrined or was envisioned by the drafters of our Constitution.
Thank you. I think you make two very, very crucial points that I hope we can come back to through the course of the conversation. One, on the importance of deliberation as holding the key to maintaining the character of the federal principle. And second, the question of equity. The first among equals, or is there something above as the union and then states come below, which I hope we can discuss in greater detail. PTR, can I come to you to ask you this? On the nature of the fiscal architecture, the Constitution has been often characterized as imagining a relatively centralized fiscal architecture. Some call it the one-third, two-third problem, in that the bulk of fiscal monetary powers rest with the union, but the bulk of expenditure powers rest with the states, creating, in ideal world, conditions for cooperation, but in not so ideal worlds, conditions for dependency of states on the center. How do you interpret the Constitution's framing of the fiscal architecture for India?
First of all, thanks for inviting me and having me be part of this wonderful panel. Look, I think I'll just step back a little bit. I think at the heart of the notion of federalism is some component of every person's desire for self-determination and a place at the table where big decisions are made. I mean, that's really what federalism is all about. Nobody should be dictating my outcome without my input in the system. Right? And you look at it state to union, or you look at it state to village. It's this notion that in a democracy, there should be some participation and right to self-determination. Also, I think, as KTR pointed out, Ambedkar itself saw this as a function of time. If you look around the world, with economic progress, with increase in population, with increased education levels, you will see greater and greater devolution of power. You will see greater and greater, kind of flow down of decision making, because you get decision making closer to the people. That has 1,000 advantages, but that's how the rest of the world has gone. We started in a very unusual place, as many have pointed out. The words were there, but the design or the intention was not actually evident. I guess we could have gone the way of most of the world and started to see more devolution, more self-determination. In fact, we have seen the exact opposite, particularly in the fiscal space. Almost all direct taxation is with the union. That's very unique in the world. No other country has that much control. If you don't have any input into direct taxation, that means you don't have any right to determine whether you should be a progressive taxation regime or a regressive. All we get to do, at least we used to get to do, was set the sales taxes and the point of sale taxes and the regressive indirect taxes. Now even that we've sacrificed for the GST. So effectively, we have almost no control in the nature of revenue raising for the country. Are we really a socialist country? Are we really taking taxes from those who can afford to pay and using it to provide public goods and services and supporting those who, have fallen behind? We don't have an adequate say into that system, number one. Number two, it used to be that 2/3 of the spending was directed by the states. Maybe, I don't know. Right now, that's not true, because the way the union government diverts things into cesses and surcharges and then names all these schemes, PM this and, something, and then they say we do partial funding the first year, and then they shift the funding to us the second year, and by the fourth year, we still have to call it PM something, but 100% of the funds come from us. So if you look at the percentage of devolution that comes through share of taxes compared to what comes through grants and schemes decided by the center, and increasingly in this regime, named after one individual in the center, then we have lost that independence or that self-determination or that participation as well. So in every way, from a fiscal perspective, from revenue raising, 90% now with the GST Council there, and with spending increasingly there, even though we are the administrators of that spending, they get to design how it should get done, then they get to ask for all kinds of data, then they get to say, no, you qualify, don't qualify. So I would say India started in the wrong place in terms of federalism and has regressed aggressively in the last 8 years or so.
We started in the wrong place and we have regressed. May I ask you, Ms. Reddy, for your view on that provocation, but also there was a third element to India's federal imagination, which was the local governments. In our constitution in 1950, we placed that into the directive principles, and it took all the way till the early 1990s and a constitutional amendment for them to be formally recognized as part of India's federal architecture. Did we, constitutionally, was that a mistake? Did we wait too long to recognize local governments and place them firmly within the architecture of our federal structure?
Yeah, first of all, thanks to the organizers and the founders of South First, Mr. Vasu and all the other founders, and also all the respected colleagues in the panel today. Well, coming to that, Yamini, I think you're very right in saying that it was delayed sizably, and then even after the delay, the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments that came in order to rectify that delay to some extent also did not actually materialize. Normally, there are two ways. One, the requirement of various areas or territories to come together and be one in order to have a common cause or protection or a common future, etc. The other is to hold territories by way of having a country or a republic. India actually became a union in peculiar circumstances which with a long history and various happenings. So the aspirations of the people of this country at that point of time when we got independence would be quite different from what the generation of today actually see or perceive. The local bodies should have been strengthened and should have been firmly in place right from day one. Because of the delay and because of it not happening, gradually over a period of time, there arose some sort of a blurredness between the relationship between center and state. Now states are complaining about the federal structure that includes autonomy, that includes fiscal matters. But how much are the states actually looking into the local bodies? How many states actually have empowered Zilla Parishads? How many states actually have empowered the Mandal Parishads or the Taluks? How many states have actually empowered the Panchayats? So sometimes what we do, we get in return. So I feel that this structure, federal structure, if implemented in spirit and objective right to the level of Gram Panchayat, will actually over a period of time stop this change of policy or change of objective which actually was envisaged by the authors of our constitution.